Hi, my name is Simon. I'm from the Norwegian EV Association. We are gathering more than 1,000 people from over 40 different countries at our annual Nordic EV Summit out here at Nova Spectrum in Lillestrøm. I'm sitting here in our own EV together with Colin McKerracher from BloombergNEF. Welcome. Who are you and what do you do?
I run a group called the Clean Transport Research Group at BloombergNEF. Bloomberg's a big media and financial services company. BloombergNEF is the division of it that gathers data and does analysis on everything to do with the energy transition, the move to a low carbon economy. We advise all sorts of companies across the value chain in their strategies on how to do that. So I run the group that looks at everything to do with batteries, EVs, charging infrastructure, and other parts of clean transport.
All right, exciting. So actually kind of like a wizard and mathematician and statistics in commodities in the industry.
Yeah, we're the people with the data about what's going on. So we've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing this around clean transport for a decade, BloombergNEF for 20 years. So we've got a long history in tracking the energy transition and trying to shed a bit of light on where things are going next.
So let's go to the first topic. As we know, now Norway is world leading on EV adoption. Denmark is very fast behind. I actually just got a number from one of my Danish friends here, and he said to me that the first quarter of this year, Denmark actually have a sold in private cars on EVs on 86%. Amazing, yeah. But we have the European Union and the Commission. They just announced a couple of weeks ago that they are going to lag a little bit on this so-called CO2 regulation standards. In other words, meaning how much the car industry is permitted to emit every year in their car sales. And not to get into detail with that specifically legislation-wise, but I mean, when we had a target in the European Union towards the car industry, and now the Commission is giving them a little stretch on complying with these standards. What does that mean in the European car market? Yeah,
so the targets that were in place it's important to note they were agreed 6 years ago, so everyone had a lot of time to prepare for this. Yeah. They would have required a very significant increase in EV sales this year, and the automakers were generally planning on that. They were planning on launching lower cost models, more mass market models this year to try and hit the target. But I think the European Commission was a little bit worried about the optics of some of the local manufacturers in particular paying other manufacturers like Tesla or the Chinese automakers in order to form what they called a pooling agreement, which allowed them to sort of average the CO2 emissions of those companies with the European companies, but they would have to pay for that privilege. I think the European Commission was uncomfortable with that, so they said, we're going to push this back. Now they can comply anytime between now and 2027. So they don't have to comply specifically in 2025 or 2026, but the average over the 3 years from now till 2027 has to hit the target. And that will require a pretty significant increase in EV sales across the whole EU.
Yeah, but again, do you think it will slow down significantly or just a little bit in, for example, markets like France and Germany and Denmark, Sweden?
I think it'll slow it down because the automakers otherwise would have faced some fines this year. So they were very strongly motivated to sell a lot of EVs. But at the same time, a lot of them planned their model launch cycle to coincide with this. So the vehicles are now mostly available this year and next year. So I think you'll get sort of somewhere in the middle. It won't fully slow it down. It won't be exactly like it was before, but you will have some effect of that slowdown.
Yeah, sure. The CEO from Volvo, he was complaining because Volvo is actually complying with this, and Volvo is running the show on the EV transition right now, and they have been complying with this regulation, but they don't get any carrot, they don't get any stick, they don't get anything for actually being complying. Is that fair, do you think?
Well, I think it's very problematic that they've changed it in the middle of a compliance year, because I think some of those automakers who did make those investments would have gotten significant money from the ones that weren't compliant. So the laggards pay the leaders. That's the way it works. So I do think there's a bit of unfairness there. What I would like to see, and what I think you will see, is that we track battery prices very closely. They are continuing to come down. Battery prices are continuing to come down. What that means is that the profit margins on EVs can go up. And once you get the profit margins on EVs up just a little higher, then everyone isn't dragging their feet and just doing the minimum that is required by the regulation, but rather they're saying, okay, this is a genuine profit center for us. We're going to start pushing more of these. You're getting very close to that point. So in the next few years, as these low battery prices that we've seen in China start to trickle outwards to the rest of the world, Tariffs could still change that, but I think you will still see lower battery prices. I think that will start to create this momentum where you see more automakers making significant money on their EVs and then no longer opposing the regulations quite so strongly.
Yeah, all right, let's go to the tariffs then.
Yeah, tariffs.
All right.
Topic of the day.
Yeah, it's the topic of the day. Actually, my question is just because we know that the EV transition is primarily driven of people getting an affordable and good vehicle that they can purchase instead of purchasing an ICE car and a fossil fuel car.
Yeah.
With the tariffs now in motion as per today, will EVs get a little bit more or much more expensive in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, France within a year or two, slowing down the market significantly? Or what do you think? What is the math of the day? Trying to make a prediction?
Yeah, it varies a lot depending on where the EVs are made. Certainly any EVs that are crossing borders are going to get a lot more expensive as everyone puts up more and more tariff barriers.
Yeah.
I think some of the ones that are domestically produced, there will be an impact from some of the parts that are getting tariffed as they cross borders, but that'll be less. I think in Europe, a lot of the European vehicles are produced here, right? We don't import a lot of vehicles overall. Majority of the vehicles that are being sold here are produced here. You've already seen before these tariffs, you saw more automakers moving production into Europe. So Volvo's a good example, producing the X30 first in China, then now moving it to Belgium.
Yeah.
I think you see more of that case of sort of re-onshoring of production. I think the tariffs are going to make everything more expensive though. And it's not just going to be about cars. It's going to be everything from the food we eat to the toys we buy for our kids, pretty much everything, and the cars we drive, pretty much everything with tariffs gets more expensive.
Yeah. Stellantis, they said that they are going to close down 2 plants, I think it was, that they had lined up for production in Mexico and Canada.
Yep.
When Stellantis, they're going out to say, we're going to pause or close down production plants in Mexico and Canada, what will that mean also for the North American market?
Yeah.
Will it mean that in just 5 years' time that we will see a much bigger concentration of vehicles, both ICE and EVs, being made in America, like Trump wants, or will the fast approaching industry in Mexico win this round?
This is one of these very difficult things to say because it's changing every day. But here's what I'll say. There's sort of 2 effects. One is how much do the prices of vehicles go up? And I think you're going to see the price of vehicles go up quite a bit, right? That we've sort of already established. There's to import vehicles across the borders as the tariffs currently stand right now from Canada and Mexico is going to be expensive. Now, then there's a secondary effect, which is how much these tariffs overall impact the wealth of a country and people's sense of feeling a sense of wealth and how much they want to spend on new cars. I think also that hit is going to be quite big as well. So you're going to have people buying fewer cars overall. Now the question of whether that leads to more onshoring of vehicles made in the US, that trend was sort of already underway under the Biden administration because of the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided significant incentives for EVs that were made in North America or in the US versus ones made elsewhere. I think you will see more automakers looking to try and produce domestically in the US, but I think you'll also see a lot of automakers who just pull different production lines and say, this is no longer worth it for us. And I think particularly some of the entry-level vehicles, you just can't make some of them at the prices that people are used to paying for them with the tariffs that are going to be in place or with the production as it's currently structured. So I think you'll see higher costs. You'll also see less choice for consumers because they're going to pull certain models. I think you may also see these tariffs don't hold in their current form. You're already seeing a few factory shutdowns. You're going to see more factory shutdowns. It doesn't take long before that starts to become a severe political liability. You start to see a lot of factories, people out of work. That will, I think, force some changes in the way these tariffs are being discussed and structured, but that might take some time, and in the meantime, it's going to be a bit painful.
So finally, Detroit got that revival period under Obama and Biden, and now we see maybe Detroit going bonkers again?
Maybe. I mean, Detroit has been through several revivals, and if you've been to the Renaissance Center in Detroit, that was sort of meant to be a very early version of the revival. I think one of the things that has happened in the North American market, this is separate from EVs, is that the share of the models made by US automakers has steadily gone down over the last 30 years. It's gone down as the Japanese entered, the Koreans entered. This may reverse that a little bit, but I think the hit on people's spending power from these tariffs is going to be bigger than that effect, and it's going to reduce the overall amount of vehicles that are sold by anybody, regardless of where they're from, regardless of what type of drivetrain they have.
Yeah, sure. Another topic that is also very much discussed is batteries.
Yeah.
Let's go to that. We saw recently that the Northvolt plant in Sweden, the Swedish flagship in battery production, almost totally collapsed.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that was a sad day, I think, personally.
Agree.
And then we have some Norwegian companies. They say we're still in the fight.
Yep.
Because they also make batteries a little different way, and so on, so on. And we did see today here at the Nordic EV Summit that there are actually a lot of battery manufacturing plants in Europe, but mainly everything is produced right now in China. Is it just a dream, or is it realistic to ramp up sufficient battery manufacturing in Europe so that can supply the auto industry and all the other industries that need batteries? Is it a dream, or is it realistic?
I don't think it's a dream. So I think if you go 10 years out, I think the vast majority of the batteries used in Europe are going to be produced in Europe. We're not going to be shipping huge quantities of batteries overseas. They're difficult to ship, it's expensive to ship. I think you are going to have more domestic production. The big question is who's going to be doing that production. And I think the majority of the production will probably be from companies that have a long track record in producing batteries. So that may be the South Koreans or the Chinese setting up local manufacturing. So you still get that investment, you still get that job creation, but a lot of it is from established battery manufacturers. It's very difficult to set up a new battery manufacturing operation. Having said that, I think it's great that there are some domestic names still trying to scale up production and trying to be part of that mix. Diversity of supply is a very good thing for any industry, and you want to have multiple suppliers who can supply the technology so that you can keep bringing down prices. So I think there will be production in Europe. I think there'll be a variety of groups producing batteries in Europe. I think the majority of the production will probably come from some of the biggest battery manufacturing names today.
Okay, so we will see South Korean, Japanese, Chinese companies settling production in Europe.
You're already seeing that, and I think you'll see more of that.
So more. All right, interesting perspective.
Yeah.
All right. What about, a daily concern for an EV driver here in Norway is that, my Nissan Leaf is getting old. And what about my battery? In Norway, we have Hydrovolt, who are located in Fredrikstad, which is a bigger city located right at the Swedish border almost. And they are some of the front runners and some of the first in the world to actually establishing a plant recycling batteries. But that's only one plant, and we are seeing many more EVs on the road. Talk a little bit about if you were a Norwegian EV driver and your EV is getting older and older, what's going to happen with the battery? And can it be recycled? And do you have enough capacity to recycle all the EV batteries?
So the first thing is it can definitely be recycled. So a battery can be recycled. A battery can also be used in a second life application before it gets recycled. I was down speaking to Hydrovolt quite recently in Fredrikstad, and one of the things that comes out from that, and this happens when you speak to other recyclers too, is that the batteries are lasting a lot longer than expected. So if you go back a few years, people would have said, the batteries last 10, 12 years. Now it's more like we think the batteries last 15 to 18 years. So quite a bit longer than people expected. Say at the lower end of that 15, but that means that actually the volume of end-of-life batteries has been lower than expected. So when you go and see Hydrovolt, they have more capacity than they have batteries to process because the batteries are lasting longer. That's a good thing. Yeah. That's a very good thing from an environmental perspective if batteries are lasting longer than expected.
Yeah.
I remember in the early days of talking about EVs, people thought like 8 years, and that's steadily gone out. So the batteries have gotten better and better, lasting and longer and longer.
Yeah.
So then the question is, when they do finally end, and you see all these vehicles on the road, you know they are going to come to their end of life eventually. What do you do with them? Some of them can get used in second life applications, but I think most of them overall will end up being recycled. The question is at what price? So are you getting a payment for that battery, or are you paying someone to take that battery?
Yeah.
And that very much depends on a couple of things. It depends on the battery chemistry. If you have a nickel manganese cobalt battery, so that's the family of battery chemistries with those materials in the cathode of the battery, If the prices of those are really high, that battery is quite valuable because you can recycle that cobalt, you can recycle that nickel, and you can recycle some of the lithium in it. If you have a lithium iron phosphate battery, it's much cheaper to buy new, but it also has less valuable materials in it, less valuable stuff to recycle. So you can recycle the lithium, but the other stuff in it's not really worth recycling. So then the question is, where are the price of those raw materials on the market? Say, are we at the top of the cycle or the bottom of the cycle? Right now, those are very cheap. So right now, if you go and say, I have an end-of-life battery, you generally have to pay someone to take it from you. Not always, but it depends on the operation, depends on the location, depends on supply and demand in that market. But generally, those are being paid to be taken, then they're recycling them. So what I would say is that it's absolutely possible to build all the recycling capacity we need. We're starting to see more and more of it come online. Batteries are lasting longer than expected. The exact economics of it are going to depend on the raw material prices and the battery chemistries that are being used.
Yeah. Is there enough capital in the pipeline, do you think, investing in the battery recycling plants, not only in Europe but globally? Because there must be a huge demand coming for such plants.
Yeah, I don't worry about that too much. I think we've seen a fair amount of activity already, and I think as soon as the volume starts to be there, you'll see the capital start to flow into that. Right. I think the bigger challenge is actually just that, like we said, the batteries are lasting a long time. They're outperforming many expectations. Yeah. Once we get clarity on exactly how long they're lasting and that flow starts to come in, then I think you'll see the money start to flow in on the manufacturing investment side.
Yeah, so entire new industry actually.
Yeah, and what you want is you want to dig the materials out of the ground once and then keep using them.
Exactly.
And you don't want to keep importing those materials from different parts of the world. So I think what you'll see is more emphasis on not just recycling, but taking the black mass, it's sometimes called, where you get from grinding up the battery, and keeping that within the same region. So saying, look, you can recycle the battery, but we want you to keep the recycled material in Europe to go into remanufacturing of batteries, so that we're not continually importing raw material supplies into Europe. We're either importing it once or we're digging it out locally, and then we're keeping that in a closed loop. I think the main thing that I think of too is just like, what a different world that you can recycle your source of propulsion almost indefinitely. There's a little bit of losses each time, but you compare that to a gasoline engine or a diesel-powered engine. Once you're lighting things on fire, you can't reverse that process.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. My last question actually is, for example, now we are at the Nordic EV Summit 2025. Yep. If we were to sit here at the Nordic EV Summit in 2035, yep, looking 10 years ahead, like if you go to Indonesia, if you go to Vietnam, if you go to Brazil, if you're traveling in Africa, in what decade do you think that we will see a majority of electric transport, both cars, trucks, scooters? Will it be in 2040, 2050, 2060, or 2070? What do you think?
If we're talking about a majority and just over 50%, I think you'll get there around 2035, so a little over a decade from now. Yeah. Trucks will be a bit slower, but already you're seeing really good progress on buses, 2- and 3-wheeled vehicles. 3-wheeled vehicles are going really quickly. Yeah. Because they're used intensively, and the economics, the total cost of ownership is pretty good. Yeah. 2-wheeled vehicles, you're seeing a lot of innovation around things like battery swap and higher performance scooters and things like that. Yeah. And then cars, I think we're seeing real bottom-up innovation. We're seeing a lot of push on some of the lower cost models, particularly the Chinese automakers setting up in places like Southeast Asia, setting up in Brazil, setting up manufacturing there with models that are aimed specifically at local buyers. So low cost models, but still with very good performance. So I'm actually more and more optimistic that emerging markets are going to go faster than people think. This isn't only a top-down wealthy market story anymore. It's happening in in a lot of emerging economies at the same time.
What a great outlook. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Good to chat.
Good to chat. Have a nice day.
Thanks.